Were Neanderthal spears better than ours? It seems like a simple question, a contest. We line up the tools, look at the stats, and declare a winner. But it's not that simple. The real answer is more interesting. It's a story about two different kinds of people, living in different ways, solving the same problem: how to survive. First, we have to get one thing straight. Neanderthals were not the dumb, grunting brutes we see in old cartoons. That image is wrong. They were incredibly smart, strong, and successful. They survived in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. That's a run of success modern humans haven't even come close to matching. They were experts at living in a tough world. And their tools were a huge part of that success. So let's look at their spear. Imagine holding a Neanderthal spear. It would be heavy, thick, probably made from a solid piece of yew or ash, fire hardened at the tip. Think less of a javelin and more of a lance. Some of the most amazing examples ever found are the Schöningen spears from Germany. They're about 400,000 years old, which means they were likely made by a pre-Neanderthal ancestor, but they show the design philosophy that would last for ages. These things are masterpieces of woodworking. They are long, over 6 feet, and perfectly balanced. The thickest, heaviest part is about a third of the way up from the point. That's not an accident. That's the center of gravity, placed exactly where you'd want it for a powerful forward thrust. This wasn't a throwing spear. You didn't stand back and hurl it from a distance. You held onto it. This was a weapon for getting up close. Very close. This tells us a lot about how Neanderthals hunted. They weren't chasing animals across open plains. They were likely ambush hunters. They used the terrain. They used the forests and valleys of Ice Age Europe to their advantage. A group of Neanderthals built like powerlifters would corner a huge animal. A wild horse, a giant deer, maybe even a woolly rhino. Then, they would move in as a team, using these heavy spears to jab and thrust. It was a dangerous way to live. Think about it. You're a few feet away from a terrified, powerful animal that weighs a ton or more. An animal with horns or hooves that could crush your skull. There was no room for error. It was brutal, direct, and incredibly effective. How do we know this was their style? The skeletons tell a story. Many Neanderthal fossils show a pattern of injuries. Healed fractures to the head, neck, and arms. It's a specific kind of damage. Scientists compared these injuries to a modern group of people who suffer similar patterns of trauma: professional rodeo riders. People who get thrown around by large, angry animals. The conclusion is clear. Neanderthals were regularly getting into close quarters fights with their prey. Their lives were a constant high-stakes rodeo, and their spears were the perfect tool for that job. A heavy, solid spear doesn't break easily. When you're pushing it into the thick hide of a bison, you need something that can withstand the immense force. A lighter, throwing spear might just snap. The weight of the Neanderthal spear also meant that the force of the thrust was devastating. It was all about delivering a massive amount of shock and damage in one powerful push. Later on, Neanderthals improved the design. They didn't just use sharpened wood. They became masters of stone tool technology, specifically something called the Levallois technique. This was a sophisticated way to prepare a core of flint and then strike off a perfectly shaped flake in one go. The points they made were large, triangular, and sharp. They were a bit like a stone bayonet. Then came the next challenge. How do you attach this stone point to a wooden shaft? You can't just tie it on with a bit of vine. It would wobble and fall off after the first impact. And Neanderthals figured this out. They created the world's first known synthetic adhesive. They used the bark of birch trees, heating it in a controlled, oxygen-starved environment. This process, called dry distillation, creates a thick, black, waterproof tar. It's an excellent glue. Think about the brain power required for that. First, you have to recognize that birch bark has this hidden property. Then you have to figure out the complex process to extract it. It requires controlling fire, planning ahead, and understanding material science on a deep, intuitive level. This wasn't an accidental discovery. It was engineering. They would coat the base of the stone point in this tar, insert it into a carved-out notch in the wooden shaft, and then wrap it tightly with animal sinew. The result was a rock-solid bond. The stone point and the wooden shaft became one weapon. So, the Neanderthal spear was a heavy, robust, high-damage thrusting weapon. It was made with incredible skill and a deep understanding of natural materials. For the world they lived in and the way they hunted, it was a nearly perfect tool. It was not a primitive club, it was a specialized piece of lethal technology. Now, let's look at the spears that our ancestors, early Homo sapiens, were using when they arrived in Europe. At first, their spears might have looked quite similar, but then a change started to happen. The tools began to get smaller, lighter. The philosophy of the weapon shifted. Our ancestors started to focus on something else distant. The big innovation was the projectile. The idea that you could kill something without having to be right next to it. This was a game changer. The spears themselves were different. They were thinner, lighter, and more flexible. They were designed not for the brute force of a thrust, but for the aerodynamics of flight. The stone points also changed. Instead of one big, heavy point, Homo sapiens developed techniques to make smaller, sharper points, sometimes called microliths. They were more efficient to make. From the same piece of flint that a Neanderthal might use to get one big Levallois point, a Homo sapiens could produce many smaller, razor-sharp blades. These could be used as spear points, arrowheads, or even parts of a composite tool. It was a different approach to resources. It was about quantity and versatility, not just size and power. But the light spear was only half of the equation. The real revolution was a new piece of equipment, the spear thrower. In Europe, it's often called by its Aztec name, the atlatl. The atlatl is deceptively simple. It's basically a stick with a hook or a spur on the end. You rest the back of the spear against this hook and hold the atlatl. It acts as an extension of your arm. When you throw, you're not just using the motion of your shoulder and elbow. You're adding another lever to the system, another joint. This whip-like action dramatically increases the speed and power of the spear. It's pure physics, a simple machine that turns a human into a much more powerful predator. A spear thrown with an atlatl can travel faster, fly farther, and hit harder than one thrown by hand alone. We're talking speeds of over 90 miles per hour, we're talking effective ranges of dozens of yards, not just a few feet. This changed everything about the hunt. With an atlatl, you didn't have to get close. You could stand at a safe distance and launch a volley of light, fast spears at your target. A group of hunters could coordinate their attack, striking an animal from multiple directions at once. The risk of getting gored or trampled plummeted. The hunt was no longer a high-contact sport. It became a contest of skill, aim, and strategy. This new technology opened up new possibilities. Neanderthals were experts of the forest and the ambush. Their tools were perfect for that. But what about the wide-open grasslands, the steppes of Ice Age Europe? It's hard to ambush a herd of reindeer or horses when they can see you coming from a mile away. But with a projectile weapon system, you don't need to. You can stalk them from a distance. You can hunt more skittish, faster animals. You can even hunt smaller game like birds or rabbits, where the risk of getting close isn't worth the reward. The atlatl and light spear system made our ancestors more versatile. They weren't just specialists of one environment. And they were generalists who could adapt to many. So now we can put the two systems side by side. On one hand, you have the Neanderthal spear, a heavy-duty, close-quarters thrusting weapon. A masterpiece of durability and raw power, the tool of a specialist ambush hunter. Think of it as a sledgehammer. When you need to break something up close with overwhelming force, nothing is better. On the other hand, you have the Homo sapiens spear and atlatl, a lightweight, long-range projectile system. A masterpiece of physics and efficiency, the tool of a versatile strategic hunter. Think of it as a rifle. It offers safety, range, and precision. So, was the Neanderthal spear better? If your definition of better is pure stopping power in a close-range encounter, then maybe it was. A direct thrust from a heavy Neanderthal spear into the ribs of a woolly rhino was probably more devastating at point-blank range than a hit from a lighter thrown spear. The Neanderthal spear was perfectly tuned for its specific job. It was a tool that matched their bodies, strong, powerful, built for close-quarters work. They were a perfect match of biology and technology. But if your definition of better includes safety, versatility, and efficiency, then the Homo sapiens system has a clear edge. The safety is the big one. Hunting is dangerous. Every time a hunter died, the group lost a food provider, a protector, a person with a lifetime of knowledge. Lowering the risk of death or serious injury during the hunt was a huge advantage. If you can kill your dinner from 30 yards away instead of 3 feet away, you are much more likely to live to hunt another day. More surviving hunters means the group is more secure. It means populations can grow. Versatility is another factor. The climate of the Ice Age was not stable. It changed, sometimes rapidly. Forests could shrink, and grasslands could expand. A toolkit that only works well in one type of environment is a liability when that environment disappears. The Neanderthals were masters of the European woodlands, but when the climate shifted and those woodlands changed, their specialized hunting strategy might have become less effective. The Homo sapiens projectile system worked well in forests, on plains, in river valleys. It gave our ancestors more options. They could follow the food, whatever it was, and wherever it went. They were not tied to a single strategy. And then there's efficiency, not just in terms of safety, but in terms of resources. The ability to make many small, sharp points from a single piece of stone meant that our ancestors could equip more hunters or replace broken points more easily. They got more cutting edge for their rock. It was a more sustainable way of using a finite resource. This technological difference may have been one of many factors that led to the eventual disappearance of the Neanderthals. It's a complicated and debated topic. It probably wasn't a simple case of our ancestors wiping them out in a war. It was likely a long, slow process of competition over thousands of years. Imagine two groups of people living in the same valley. One group, the Neanderthals, has to get dangerously close to hunt. Their hunts are successful, but sometimes a hunter is badly injured or killed. Their population growth is slow and steady, but fragile. The other group, Homo sapiens, hunts from a safer distance. Their hunters are injured less often. More of their children grow up with fathers and mothers to teach and protect them. Their population can grow a little bit faster, a little bit more reliably. They might also be able to hunt a wider variety of animals, so if the big megafauna become scarce, they have other options. Over a few generations, this small difference can become a huge one. The sapiens group might just slowly, almost imperceptibly, outcompete the Neanderthal group for resources. They have a slight edge. And in the harsh world of the Ice Age, a slight edge can mean the difference between thriving and disappearing. So, to go back to the original question, were Neanderthal spears better than ours? The question itself is flawed. It's like asking if a screwdriver is better than a hammer. They are different tools for different jobs, designed by different minds to solve problems in different ways. The Neanderthal spear wasn't worse. It was a perfect solution for a specific problem. It was an incredibly effective tool that allowed Neanderthals to be the dominant predators in Europe for an immense stretch of time. It was a testament to their intelligence, strength, and skill. To call it worse is to misunderstand it and to disrespect the people who made it. But the spear system of our ancestors was, in the long run, more adaptable. The shift to projectile technology wasn't just about making a better spear. It represented a fundamental shift in thinking, a shift from confrontation to strategy. From brute force to physics, from high risk to risk management, this new way of thinking, embodied in the light spear and the atlatl, gave our ancestors a new level of flexibility. It allowed them to survive and thrive as the world changed around them. The story of these two spears isn't a story of good versus bad or advanced versus primitive. It's a story of two brilliant, valid, and very different paths of human ingenuity. One path, the Neanderthal path, was a dead end. Not because it was a bad path, but because the world it was perfectly adapted for eventually vanished. The other path, our path, happened to be the one that was flexible enough to keep going when the landscape changed. And that has made all the difference.